Loki didn't sacrifice anything. He finally got what he'd been chasing his entire life.
The final image of his story is supposed to land as tragedy, a god sitting alone on a throne made of timelines, holding existence together through sheer will, isolated for eternity so that everyone else can live. The audience watches this and feels moved, because the framing tells them they should. The music swells, the colors shift, and the narrative insists this is the moment a selfish trickster became a selfless hero. Spoilers ahead. The problem is that Loki's entire psychological architecture tells a different story, one the show itself built across years of screen time, before apparently forgetting what it had constructed. To understand what actually happened in that finale, you have to go back to the fracture that created the character. Not the god of mischief persona, not the theatrical villainy, but the raw wound underneath all of it. Loki's origin is not power or ambition. It is the discovery that he was never what he believed himself to be. The moment he learns he is adopted, that he was taken from Jotunheim as a political instrument rather than chosen as a son, every subsequent action becomes readable through a single lens. He is a person trying to answer one question that he cannot bring himself to ask out loud. Do I actually matter to anyone, or am I just a tool people keep until they no longer need me? This is the engine beneath everything. The throne of Asgard was never about governance. It was about occupying the one seat that no one could take from him without admitting he belonged there. The invasion of New York was never a military strategy that made tactical sense. It was a spectacle designed to force an entire planet to look at him and be unable to look away. Even his alliance with Thanos, which nearly destroyed him, follows the same logic. Attach yourself to the most powerful force in existence, and by proximity, you become impossible to discard. Every betrayal Loki commits is preemptive, a mechanism built by someone who learned early that people leave, so the safest move is to leave first, or make yourself so essential that leaving becomes impossible for others. The series that carries his name appears to understand this, at least initially. Stripped of his powers, dropped into the TVA, surrounded by people who view gods as irrelevant paperwork, Loki is forced into the one condition his psychology cannot tolerate, being ordinary. The early episodes work precisely because they confront him with insignificance in its purest form, and for the first time, he has to build connections not from a position of leverage, but from a position of need. Mobius doesn't follow him because of power or fear. Mobius chooses to believe he can be more than the pattern, which is exactly the kind of relationship Loki has never had and never known how to sustain. This is where the show begins to quietly contradict its own thesis. The stated arc is transformation. Loki learns humility, discovers that purpose comes from connection rather than control, and ultimately proves his growth by making the ultimate selfless choice. The actual sequence of decisions he makes in the final stretch tells a strikingly different story. When the crisis reaches its peak, Loki does not turn to his companions and ask what they should do together. He does not propose a collective solution. He does not even explain his plan. Instead, he teaches himself to control time, walks alone into the heart of the temporal loom, and single-handedly restructures the architecture of every reality in existence. He makes this choice for everyone, without consulting anyone, because he has decided that he alone understands what must be done. Consider the psychology that statement requires. This is not a person who has learned that he doesn't need to be the center of everything. This is a person who has found the ultimate justification for being the center of everything. The difference between Loki in the first Avengers film and Loki in the finale is not the underlying drive, it is the moral packaging around the same impulse. In New York, he demanded a throne and called it destiny. On the temporal loom, he seized a throne, and the narrative called it sacrifice. The emotional texture is different, certainly. He appears to suffer, he appears reluctant, he appears burdened rather than triumphant, yet the structural outcome is identical. One being elevated above all others, holding power that no one granted him and no one can take away, alone at the top because he decided that is where he belongs. The show wants the audience to interpret his isolation as the cost of his heroism, as though sitting alone forever is the price he pays for saving everyone. His psychological profile suggests something far more uncomfortable. Isolation is not the cost, it is the feature. Loki has never successfully maintained a close relationship for any sustained period. He sabotages bonds before they can deepen, because depth creates vulnerability, and vulnerability invites the kind of rejection that shattered him as a child. A throne at the end of time where he is permanently essential and permanently unreachable is not a punishment for someone with that pattern. It is the safest possible configuration of existence. No one can abandon him because no one can reach him. No one can find him insufficient because he is literally holding their lives together. He has become the thing he always needed to be, the one person the universe cannot function without, while simultaneously ensuring that no relationship will ever get close enough to test whether he is loved for who he is rather than what he provides.
If the show had followed its own psychological logic to its honest conclusion, the ending that would prove genuine transformation looks nothing like what audiences received. A Loki who truly internalized what Mobius and Sylvie represented, that being known by a small number of people is more meaningful than being needed by all of them, would have made the opposite choice. He would have recognized that seizing control of every timeline is the grandest version of the same impulse he was supposed to outgrow. The consistent ending would have required him to let go, not of his life, but of his need to be the solution.
He would have destroyed the loom, accepted that the multiverse might fracture or reorganize without his intervention, and walked back through that door to sit across from Mobius in a place where he is simply a person someone chose to spend time with. That ending has no throne, no cosmic significance, no sweeping visual of a god holding infinity in his hands. It has a man drinking coffee with a friend, which is precisely why it would have been proof that he changed, because every instinct Loki has ever demonstrated would have fought against choosing something that small.
The reason the actual ending works emotionally is that it fulfills the audience's desire to see Loki become important in a way that feels earned, noble, and grand. The reason it fails psychologically is that importance was never what he needed to learn, it was what he needed to release. The show built a character whose entire pathology revolves around the terror of insignificance, then resolved his arc by making him the most significant being in the multiverse, and asked the audience to read that as growth rather than the most elegant relapse in narrative history. He sits on that throne, vines of temporal energy wrapped around him, eyes glowing with purpose, and the audience mourns because he is alone. His psychology suggests he has never felt more at peace, because for the first time in his existence, he is certain, completely, irrevocably certain, that he cannot be replaced. If you change what the character needs, you change whether the ending is a sacrifice or a coronation. The show chose not to notice the difference.